They laid the snare with precision, convinced you would stumble, collapse, and cry out in defeat. Yet instead of anguish, they witnessed you walk forward with an unshaken stride and a quiet smile that unnerved them more than any shout could. What they planned as your downfall became the stage for heaven's strength to shine. That smile was not denial of the trap, but the proof that the trap held no lasting power over you. Their fury, though loud, is a mirror exposing the weakness of their schemes. Systems built on intimidation and manipulation depend on your collapse to validate their strength. When you walk untouched, you disrupt their order and reveal that their authority was never ultimate. Psalm 18 verse 2 reminds you that the Lord is your rock fortress and deliverer. Standing steady in him makes every snare fragile, every net powerless. Their anger is not proof of your failure, but of your victory. It is often envy cloaked in rage that shakes the room when you rise unscathed. They recognize what they cannot reproduce: resilience born in fire, peace secured in presence, joy untouchable by circumstance. Their outburst is a confession that something real has shifted in you. You carry a strength they cannot purchase, replicate, or explain. Isaiah 54 verse 17 declares that no weapon formed against you will prosper, and every tongue raised in judgment will be silenced. Their fury is evidence that those words are alive in your story. Walking untouched does not mean life spared you from pain. It means the pain no longer defines you. Every hook the enemy once used, fear, insecurity, craving approval, has been dislodged in the quiet work of surrender. You became untouchable, not by escaping the fire, but by letting the fire forge a different you. There are teachers on the outside, but the most transformative mentor is the voice God formed within you through trial. That inner advisor cannot be bribed, stolen, or imitated. It speaks from scars turned to wisdom, from ashes turned to strength. The world scrambles for explanations because it cannot fathom how power could be born from suffering. They analyze, they whisper, they accuse, but nothing fits their categories. Your smile through the trap is the contradiction they cannot decode. It is the evidence that the Spirit of God breathed triumph where defeat was scripted. John 16 verse 33 echoes this reality: in the world you will have trouble, but Christ has overcome the world. When you reflect that victory, you unsettle every system still bowing to fear. Their fury is diagnostic. It reveals more about their avoidance than about your path. Those who have never faced their own shadows are disturbed when they meet someone who has. They resent the light because it forces them to confront the darkness they protect. But your posture is not arrogance, it is alignment. Smiling in the face of schemes is not mockery, but assurance that God's justice rules the field. You no longer fight to prove yourself. You rest in the reality that heaven already affirmed your worth. And now your stride carries prophetic weight. Every step forward tells the world that integration is possible, that trauma can become testimony, that pain can become presence. Their fury does not derail your calling, it validates it. Heaven has already written your outcome, and their outrage is simply the echo of their loss. Stand steady without shrinking back or apologizing for the grace you carry, for nothing laid in your way can alter the ending God has prepared. When those who once dismissed you suddenly notice your rise, their response is rarely applause. Instead, it is often a surge of anger, a furious confusion that exposes far more about them than about you. Recognition unsettles those who built narratives of your smallness, because now they must confront a reality that contradicts their expectations. They expected you to remain bound to the version of yourself they had labeled, but the grace of God has lifted you into a dimension they can neither deny nor control. That eruption of rage is not random. It is the clash between your emergence and their unresolved failures. The moment they see you moving forward, they are forced to compare their stagnation to your progress. Rather than reflect honestly, many resort to defensiveness. They weaponize criticism, not because you are wrong, but because your presence silently convicts them of what they refuse to become. Proverbs 27 verse 6 reminds us that wounds from a friend can be trusted, but many who once mocked you are no true friends. Their anger is projection, not correction. Notice how their attacks reveal hidden fractures in their own souls. People often rage against the very qualities they lack. Your perseverance irritates their complacency. Your faith unsettles their unbelief. Your resilience threatens their excuses. Rage becomes a mirror, reflecting the gap between what they see in you and what they suppress in themselves. The fury is less about you and more about their refusal to cultivate what God has patiently built within you. The enemy often uses public outbursts as his last desperate tactic. When traps fail and whispers collapse, open fury becomes his tool to reassert control. It is an attempt to drag you back into old patterns where fear dictated your pace and shame silenced your voice. Yet Romans 12 verse 19 commands us not to avenge ourselves, but to trust God's justice, for vengeance belongs to Him alone. Their noise may be loud, but heaven's verdict is already sealed in your favor. Attempts to investigate your story will always come up empty. They will sift through your connections, analyze your mentors, even dig into your history, searching for an explanation. Yet what they cannot access is the inner architecture God built in hidden seasons. Psalm 139 verse 1 declares that the Lord has searched you and knows you completely. That unseen foundation, the long nights of prayer, the seasons of loss, the refining fires that shaped endurance is beyond their grasp. They see outcomes but cannot trace the process, and that mystery drives their confusion. Their unrest doesn't stop with individuals, it unsettles entire groups. When you enter a room with composure that cannot be shaken, alliances built on appearances start to fracture. Insecure leaders panic when presence, not politics, commands attention. Your unshakable calm reveals which foundations are false. What you carry disrupts the order of systems designed to control resources and manage influence. Anger becomes their shield against the reality that kingdom power is no longer in their grip. The louder their explanations, the clearer the truth becomes. They may insist you copied, schemed, or manipulated, but their accusations only highlight their blindness. Victory did not come by imitation of others, but through integration of pain, faith, and divine alignment. What they envy cannot be replicated because it was forged through surrender to God's hand. This is why their recognition marks a turning point. Momentum has shifted, and your destiny has moved from private shaping into public witness. Calm, steady responses in the face of such hostility complicate their plans. They anticipate retaliation, but instead they meet peace. They expect panic, but instead they see composure. That stillness is not weakness. It is prophetic defiance, a living declaration that you trust the justice of heaven more than the opinions of man. Let them rage. Their fury is not a threat, but a confirmation. It signals that heaven's covenant of power now surrounds your life, and no scheme, no jealousy, no investigation can undo what God has ordained. Beloved, they scour every corner of your history, convinced that a hidden figure or secret formula must explain your rise. Their notebooks fill with guesses, their whispers grow frantic, yet each attempt to decode your path collapses into silence. They expect to find a sponsor who opened doors, a mentor who whispered shortcuts, a system that propelled you forward. Instead, they stumble into blank pages, the kind of chapters only heaven and fire could write. The failure of their search lies in where they look. They measure resumes, networks, and affiliations, convinced that external proof defines authority. But 1 Samuel 16 verse 7 reminds us that while people fixate on outward appearance, The Lord looks at the heart. External checks can confirm titles, but they can never reveal the crucible that shaped endurance. What you carry is not the product of polished credentials, but the integrated intelligence carved from seasons that left no certificate, only scars and wisdom. In hidden places where no applause echoed, your soul received an education that cannot be published on a profile or verified by a committee. That training came when hope felt thin, when prayers seemed unanswered, when nights stretched longer than mornings. Darkness, not daylight, became the classroom where your discernment was sharpened. What they fail to understand is that the most powerful teacher never asks for visibility. It works silently, turning pain into perception and loss into strategy. Their frustration grows because they expect victory to follow a visible conductor waving the baton in public. But the real symphony took shape in quiet rooms where tears became rhythm, surrender became harmony, and resilience wrote the score. Isaiah 11 verse 2 describes the Spirit of the Lord as the Spirit of wisdom, understanding, counsel, and might. That Spirit orchestrated your development in ways no investigation can map. The orchestra they cannot hear is precisely the one that gave you authority to stand where you now stand. This is also why the hunt for a named mentor becomes so obsessive. They want a personality to blame, a figure they can interview, dismiss, or discredit. What unsettles them is realizing that your truest advisor is not a person at all, but the shadow companion forged in survival. That inner counsel arose when betrayal turned into resilience, when silence forced reflection, when failure became a textbook for strategy. It is easier for critics to believe you were coached than to face the truth that wisdom emerged because you endured what they refused to confront. Behind their probing lies fear. If they admit your strength came from walking through fire, then they must also admit that their avoidance of hardship has cost them depth. Naming a mentor allows them to avoid responsibility. Acknowledging your inner education convicts them to reckon with their own unprocessed shadows. Their walls of skepticism are not intellectual. They are protective barriers against the discomfort of transformation. The truth is sobering. Some wisdom cannot be transferred, only lived. You cannot purchase it, plagiarize it, or fast-track it. 2 Corinthians 10 verse 5 declares that every proud argument must fall before the knowledge of Christ, and that includes the illusion that human systems alone confer authority. Authentic authority is born when the mind is renewed by trial, when strongholds collapse in surrender, and when the Spirit teaches lessons no classroom can contain. That is why external investigations always fail. They are trying to chart a geography that only wilderness walkers can navigate. There is a holy justice in this arrangement. God designed certain treasures to remain inaccessible to casual observers. The wisdom He entrusted to you came with a price tag. They are unwilling to pay the endurance of waiting, the courage to keep believing, the humility to be broken and remade. They prefer credentials. You embraced crucifixion and resurrection. That difference cannot be forged in the light of approval, but only in the hidden forge of trial. Out of that fire emerged the real advisor. The one everyone tries to trace was never stored in a university archive or listed on a resume. The true guide has always sat quietly in the most private chambers of your life, a council of every version of you that refused to break. That inner gathering is what I call the shadow board, and its voice cannot be silenced, because it was forged in the hours no one applauded, in the nights no one noticed, in the moments only God saw. Every betrayal, every humiliation, every lesson learned long after the world had gone to sleep is now part of its archive. That history doesn't just vanish, it becomes strategy. The one who endured rejection now teaches you discernment. The child who felt abandoned now preserves your boundaries with unshakable clarity. The survivor who walked through fire now calculates risk with precision. Psalm 23 verse 4 declares that even though you walk through the valley of the shadow of death, you will fear no evil, for God is with you. That valley was not wasted. It became the chamber where your advisors still convene. In these quiet assemblies, every scar has a voice. One speaks caution, another whispers resilience, another insists on vigilance. Together they form a kind of internal intelligence unit that processes more than surface logic ever could. Where theories falter, lived experience sees patterns instantly. You often sense danger before evidence arrives, why you recognize opportunity others dismiss, why silence itself becomes a tactic. This counsel runs on data that no textbook can provide, your own story, refined and sanctified by God's hand. These gatherings rarely occur in the noise of the crowd. They show up during long walks, late-night prayers, and moments of reflection that most people rush past. Those rhythms are not wasted pauses, but sacred convocations. They are the times when pain translates into foresight, when loss becomes strategy, when mourning turns into wisdom. Isaiah 61 verse 3 promises that God gives beauty for ashes, oil of joy for mourning, and a garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness. Each convening of the shadow board is proof of that exchange. The question then becomes, how do you invite this counsel with intention? You do it through disciplines the world often overlooks. A journal that records not just victories but wounds becomes a living textbook. Reflection that revisits past seasons, not to reopen pain, but to harvest lessons, turns trauma into instruction. Even ritualized reviews, pausing to remember where God brought you from, are invitations for the inner counsel to speak again. You cultivate sovereignty by listening, and that sovereignty cannot be outsourced to an external mentor. Externalizing power dilutes authority. The wisdom entrusted to you through your scars is not meant to be handed off to someone else's approval. The inner counsel cannot be replicated in another voice, because God allowed you, not them, to walk through those fires. 2 Corinthians 12 verse 9 declares that His grace is sufficient, and His strength is made perfect in weakness. That weakness you once resented is the very evidence of the Spirit's presence at your table. From this counsel flow remarkable outcomes. You learn how to detect threats before they manifest, how to identify alternative entrances when doors seem closed, how to develop strategies that disarm opposition without speaking a word. Silence itself becomes weaponry, because silence leaves no trace for enemies to manipulate. These results are not random. They are the counsel's output, and they carry a signature that no investigation can counterfeit. Yet a crucial distinction must be made. Integration is not the same as reenactment. Integration means honoring the shadow board's lessons while steering with the Spirit's guidance. Reenactment, however, means letting unhealed shadows drive you recklessly into repetition. One path creates maturity, the other creates cycles. Integration yields presence. Decisions seem pre-calibrated responses, arrive with uncanny accuracy, and your spirit moves with an authority that feels almost instinctive. And that instinct is simply the inner counsel operating as designed, aligned with the spirit of truth. You see, every scar tells a story, but not every story is wasted. What once cut deep can under God's hand sharpen into a blade of wisdom. The very wounds that threaten to silence you now hold the potential to direct your stride with precision. Romans 8 verse 28 reminds us that all things work together for good to those who love God, and that includes the jagged memories you once wished to forget. When you allow the Spirit to breathe upon them, what was once chaos becomes strategy, and what seemed like defeat turns into carefully forged ammunition for tomorrow's battles. The transformation begins not by ignoring pain, but by facing it with honesty. Every betrayal, every disappointment, every crushing loss must be brought into the light of God's presence. To bury memory is to leave raw material unused. To name it is to begin transmuting it. James chapter 1 verse 3 declares that the testing of faith produces perseverance. Each trial carries not only its sting, but also its pattern, its hidden logic, and its lesson that, if examined, can serve as guidance for the future. You are not merely surviving what happened, you are gathering intelligence for a life led with sharper discernment. Consider how trauma shifts when you reinterpret it as data. A failed friendship reveals the danger of ignoring red flags. A financial misstep uncovers the cost of rushing instead of waiting on God's timing. A harsh word from someone trusted teaches the necessity of guarding your heart while still walking in forgiveness. These are not just painful episodes. They are blueprints showing what faltered, why it did, and what pivot could have prevented collapse. Pain, when filtered through divine wisdom, becomes a library of lessons written in fire but preserved for your good. Yet this conversion requires discipline. Left unattended, wounds rot into bitterness disguised as wisdom. True alchemy happens when grief is processed rather than suppressed, when confession is made instead of hidden, and when accountability is welcomed rather than avoided. 1 Peter 5 verse 10 declares that after you have suffered a little while, the God of all grace will restore, confirm, strengthen, and establish you. That restoration is not abstract. It is the very mechanics of pain, turning into power of darkness, birthing vision of loss, cultivating clarity. From this refining comes predictive power. You begin to recognize atmospheres long before words are spoken. You can discern the shape of betrayal before it unfolds, not out of paranoia, but because you have walked that road before and survived it. The energy of a room no longer overwhelms you. You read it like a script already familiar. What once blindsided you now signals warning early enough to pivot. Such precision is not paranoia, it is prophetic awareness sharpened by lived experience. Decisions birthed from this alchemy no longer react impulsively, but arise with forethought. Choices are measured not only by present desire, but also by the mapped-out memory of patterns past. Like a craftsman who knows which tool fits, which moment you move with intentionality, guided by wisdom purchased in the crucible. The Spirit refines your perception until even silence becomes a strategy, restraint becomes a weapon, and timing itself becomes revelation. Still, this process carries responsibility. The intelligence born from suffering must never be weaponized for revenge. Stewardship, not retaliation, defines the child of God. To use transmuted pain is to protect others from similar harm, to restore what was broken, and to extend blessing even where hurt once originated. Anything less dishonors the refining fire that God allowed for your good. Remember, vengeance belongs to the Lord. Your task is to move forward with clarity, leaving justice in His hands. Some will look for shortcuts, unwilling to pay the cost of deep integration. But wisdom cannot be borrowed, it must be earned. No certification, no borrowed authority, no second-hand formula can substitute for the holy process of pain turned to precision. It is the long obedience in the same direction, the steady surrender, the willingness to bleed, and yet believe again, that equips you with a strength that cannot be counterfeited. While others scheme on a board, they believe is the whole game you operate on dimensions they cannot perceive. They think in terms of moves and counter-moves, but your advantage lies in something subtler. Intelligence drawn from scars turned into signals, lessons refined into foresight. Proverbs 2 verse 6 declares that the Lord gives wisdom, and from His mouth come knowledge and understanding. That divine endowment fused with your lived experiences becomes the quiet operating system that navigates you through environments others misjudge. Hidden intelligence is not always loud. It rarely announces itself, but it runs constantly like a current beneath your awareness. What some call instinct or gut feeling is often the Spirit translating lived data into sudden alerts. A conversation shifts tone, and your heart senses danger before evidence presents itself. An opportunity appears ordinary, yet something within whispers, "Step now." These moments feel almost pre-scripted because they are the product of an inner system running silent calculations that others cannot detect. Ephesians 6 verse 12 reminds us that the battle is not against flesh and blood, but against unseen forces. Your discernment is proof that God equips you to detect more than human eyes reveal. That detection does not operate on wild guesses. It functions through emotional memory and pattern recognition. When behaviors mirror past harm, your spirit raises a flag not out of paranoia, but out of recognition. The person who masks aggression with charm, the deal that feels rushed, the smile that hides calculation. All these patterns echo histories you have already endured. Rather than ignoring them, you listen, because every scar has archived data that protects you from repeating cycles. Pain once lived becomes wisdom now leveraged. Such intelligence is cultivated in solitude. It is in the long showers where your mind rehearses conversations, in the dreams that deliver unfiltered revelations, and in the silent walks where thoughts settle into clarity. These are not wasted moments. They are the operational data centers of your life. In these quiet spaces, God aligns your memory with His Spirit until fragmented experiences knit into usable strategy. Matthew 10 verse 16 commands you to be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. Wisdom is gathered in stillness. Harmlessness comes from refusing to weaponize it in selfish ways. From that hidden discipline emerges a presence others can feel. Without saying a word, your spirit sorts the room. Allies find themselves drawn to you, sensing stability and truth. Pretenders, however, feel unsettled because the frequency you carry exposes duplicity without you needing to speak it aloud. This calibration is not manipulation, it is alignment. What you have integrated within begins to broadcast outward, and those who belong to your journey will recognize it without explanation. There are also deliberate practices that strengthen this inner system. Nightly debriefs help your spirit review the day, sifting lessons from distractions. Dream logs allow you to capture the imagery that often carries coded instructions. Scenario rehearsals in private imagining conversations, weighing responses, discerning possible outcomes, sharpen your readiness when real moments arrive. These practices, though hidden, build a bank of strategies that surface when needed, giving the impression that you are always prepared. It is vital to distinguish hidden intelligence from paranoia. Fear invents threats where none exist. Wisdom detects patterns that already proved destructive. Paranoia drains energy, but disciplined caution preserves it. Your hidden system is not designed to make you suspicious of everyone, but to help you navigate with moral clarity. When applied rightly, it prevents unnecessary conflict, shields you from traps, and positions you for decisive advancement. Operating with this intelligence is both gift and stewardship. The more faithfully you refine it, the more powerfully it functions. God's Spirit confirms what memory supplies, creating a partnership between heaven's wisdom and human experience. You become a vessel, not easily deceived, a leader, not easily derailed, a believer moving forward with uncanny accuracy. Friend, when that vision matures, they feel it before a syllable leaves your lips. The air shifts, the atmosphere tightens, and hearts lean in without knowing why. That is the unseen force of presence, a reality born not of posturing, but of integration, alignment, and the Spirit of God resting upon you. Proverbs 18 verse 10 declares, "The name of the Lord is a strong tower. The righteous run to it and are safe." When His name and your spirit converge, you do not merely enter a room, you carry a tower into it. This force is the visible residue of an inner work few ever commit to. It compresses time because it unites intention, memory, and boundary into a singular field that cannot be faked. Those who walk fractured carry scattered signals, but those who walk whole transmit one clear frequency. That clarity makes predators hesitant, manipulators ineffective, and seekers attentive. Luke 10 verse 19 assures you of authority over serpents and scorpions, and often that authority shows itself not always in what you say, but in what emanates from you before you speak. Authority expressed this way creates what I call energetic sovereignty. It is the invisible perimeter around your life that makes it clear where access ends. It is why manipulators who once drained you suddenly find themselves silenced. They are not silenced by arguments, but by boundaries forged in fire, boundaries that announce themselves without your needing to explain them. This sovereignty is not pride, it is protection. It is the declaration that the temple of God within you is not up for negotiation. But this influence does more than guard, it amplifies truth. A person of integrity, when anchored, does not need 1,000 words. A few sentences land like thunder because they carry the weight of a life aligned with heaven. That explains why some listen in rapt attention while others grow restless. What radiates from you exposes the heart condition of every listener. Acts 1 verse 8 says, "You will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes upon you," and that power is not limited to miracles and signs. It radiates in the moral gravity that makes your words carry unusual impact. This same gravity functions as a sorting device. Authentic seekers feel drawn not to you, but to the God they sense flowing through you. Those addicted to control or performance, however, feel unsettled and may even resist. It is not you they resist. It is the spirit confronting their false securities. You never need to defend yourself against whispers or slander. Your very being sorts allies from pretenders. To cultivate such depth requires intentional practice. Breathwork before stepping into charged spaces steadies the nervous system. Rehearsing short scriptures in your heart anchors you so that when you walk in, the word is already alive within. Simple internal protocols, a pause, a prayer, a deep breath, become like sharpening the edge of a sword before battle. These practices do not inflate ego, they ground you in God. True presence, however, must always carry humility. Without humility, it becomes domination, and domination is not kingdom. The most commanding people are often the most surrendered. Their quietness disarms hostility and even makes flattery powerless. You do not need to prove yourself when what rests on you already speaks. Avoid confusing this influence with coercion. It is not manipulation, it is invitation. Those willing to align with truth feel compelled to rise higher, while those unwilling naturally step back. In either case, the energy accomplishes the work without you forcing outcomes. Even gossip loses its hold, as the steadiness of your life undermines its credibility. Your reputation is maintained not through constant defense, but through consistent alignment. And that calibration must be ongoing. Presence is not a one-time deposit, it is a daily renewal. Prayer sharpens it, rest protects it, and reconciliation with God and yourself keeps it unbroken. What you carry into a room is simply the overflow of how faithfully you have kept your altar in secret. Let presence, not performance, shift the atmosphere. Let the Spirit in you command without words, and trust that heaven's authority will always speak louder than your effort. From this consistent alignment comes access to patterns of timing, to wisdom woven across seasons, to God's orchestration appearing as prophetic precision. Hebrews 11 verse 6 reminds us that God rewards those who diligently seek Him, and part of that reward is clarity at the exact moment you need it. What others call intuition or instinct is often the Spirit illuminating paths you have already walked in shadow, revealing them now as maps for the present. What makes this flow remarkable is not simply that you know, but how you know. Lessons you once thought buried are never lost. Every scar and victory, each misstep and breakthrough has formed a lattice, a living framework of experience. When new situations arrive, that lattice allows you to connect patterns instantly. A conversation, a glance, a sudden opportunity, all of them are matched against this network, and clarity emerges with speed that startles even you. Isaiah 46 verse 10 proclaims that God declares the end from the beginning. That truth reverberates in your spirit, enabling you to sense trajectories long before they unfold. Downloads, as many describe them, often appear sudden, as though dropped into the mind without warning. But they are not sudden. They are the surfacing of hidden work. Your subconscious, guided by the Spirit, has been analyzing, cross-referencing, and preparing. The strategy that bursts forth fully formed is not random brilliance, but the fruit of integrated living. Ecclesiastes 3 verse 1 declares, "There is a season for everything," and this is proof. The wisdom you need appears in its appointed moment, neither late nor early, but right on time. This temporal advantage is what compresses months of testing into minutes of action. While others wrestle through trial and error, you pivot decisively because the rehearsal has already happened, not in visible arenas, but in the secret places of grief, of endurance, of relentless faith. The choice that appears bold to the world is actually familiar to you. You have already walked its corridors in prayer, in reflection, in pain, until the step became obvious. What feels risky to them is simply recognition to you. Such access does not come without cultivation. Silence becomes more than rest. It is the chamber where signals surface. Solitude is not loneliness. It is the tuning fork that clears static from the line. Ritual. Whether journaling, fasting, or lingering in God's presence is not empty repetition, but the way you open the channel through which strategies arrive. When you choose these disciplines, you are not performing. You are positioning. You are making room for what heaven has already deposited within you to rise to the surface with clarity. Yet there is a caution woven into this flow. Mystical precision can tempt pride, as though your edge makes you more than others. But this advantage is not spectacle. It is earned in the crucible of suffering, in the stewardship of lessons no one else wanted to face. It is entrusted, not flaunted. Pride corrupts the channel, but humility keeps it pure. This is not about spiritual sensationalism, but about faithful alignment with God's wisdom, which is higher than human imagination. Consider how many of your decisions once felt strangely familiar, as if they had already been rehearsed. That is not illusion. It is evidence of integration. Pain had archived the lesson, and when the stage appeared, you knew the lines without prompting. What looked like improvisation was memory meeting opportunity, revelation colliding with preparation. The Spirit had written it on the tablets of your heart long before you spoke it into action. This is what I call the quantum edge. It is available to anyone who refuses avoidance, who chooses to integrate rather than bury, who cultivates practices that give unconscious wisdom permission to rise. When you embrace this, you move through time with a grace that feels otherworldly, not because you bypass the process, but because you allowed the process to do its work in you. Receive these downloads in the quiet. Treat them not as mystique to be admired, but as maps to be followed. Apply them with humility, and you will see timing bend in your favor, not because of chance, but because heaven has synchronized your steps with divine orchestration. You see, their fury will not always be subtle. It will come in waves, striking at unexpected hours, pressing to test the endurance of your spirit. You cannot control how the storm rises, but you can decide how you will stand within it. The Spirit grants discernment to know when to extend mercy, when to enforce boundaries, and when to call upon heaven's justice. These three responses are not random choices. They are sacred strategies aligned with God's wisdom, each one shaped by Scripture and by the Spirit's guidance. Romans 12 verse 17 reminds us, "Repay no one evil for evil. Have regard for good things in the sight of all men." That verse is not passive resignation, but a call to active discernment to wisely navigate the tides of hostility without being swept into